Hello and welcome to Pride of South London Fan TV. Ali here bringing you my latest video, Zaha, the truth behind the stats. We look at Zaha's last 3 seasons in particular and how certain fans and pundits use those stats to discredit him both as a player and as an individual without looking at them in context. So if we go straight into the 2017-2018 season, where Zaha will score 9 goals in 29 games, which lead nicely into the 2018-2019 season, where Zaha will finally hit double figures in the Premier League, scoring 10 goals in 34 games, which finally made pundits and fans sit up and start to give him the credit I think he deserves as a player. Now, some fans and pundits even describing him as the best player outside of the top 6 after that 18-19 season. Now, ultimately, that would lead to Arsenal allegedly bringing in a bid that would not meet Crystal Palace's evaluation. It was, in fact, nowhere near. And eventually, of course, they went on to a deal for Pepe that was more financially prudent for them. That was instalments over a number of years. Whereas with us, they would have to put up a much larger initial lump sum, which Stan Kroenke was highly unlikely to ever do. Being the stingy businessman that he is, I'd say the Ian Beale of the Premier League, except that the Emirates has a worse atmosphere than Ian Beale's cafe. So, anyway, many fans and pundits then would give that as a reason for Wilf's poorer season in the 2019-20 season, where he would score 4 goals in 38 games. Now, this led to fans and pundits again coming out with some of the old tired cliches about Wilf. Some saying he was overrated all of a sudden after the season before, describing him as the best player outside the top 6. And then the old biggest cliche about Wilf, the man's got no end product. So, the actual thing though is there was much deeper context than the move that didn't materialise to Arsenal. Why Wilf's form took a downturn in terms of stats anyway. And the first thing really to look at is the fact that he became an even more marked man than he had in previous years. Now, teams like Watford had for a few years been putting 3 or sometimes even 4 on him, systematically fouling him. But that became every week. Every single team seemed to be doing this against Wilf. 2, 3 players at least, shunting him out on the left-hand side. Now, that was one change in the 2019-2020 season, was that Zaha would predominantly play through on the left-hand side, whereas in the previous seasons, he'd at times played through the middle. This allowed teams to shunt him out wide. And the fact also that didn't help him was Andros Townsend, in his own words, and this is testament to the professional that Andros Townsend is, he held his hands up in the summer in an interview he did and said that he felt partially responsible for Zaha's poorer form in the 1920 season, because Townsend himself said he struggled for his own form and fitness. And because Townsend wasn't able to resurrect the form of previous years where he was flying down that right-hand side. We all remember that absolute scorcher he scored at the Etihad in that victory we had against Man City a few years ago. He wasn't replicating that form, and that allowed the opposition defence to really focus on the left-hand side and shunt Wilf out of the game and not allow him to get into the areas where he can do damage. They did this through systematic marking, systematic fouling. Now, I know some fans will say, oh, but, you know, Wilf's a diver, Wilf's always complaining. But here's a stat for you. In the 2019-2020 season, Wilfred Zaha had the most VAR overturns of any player. And the stuff the VAR is picking up is a drop in the ocean to the kicks and the shirt pulling that man gets off the ball. So the other thing to look at as well that backs this theory up is if you look at Aubameyang for Arsenal this season, he's been moved to the left-hand side to accommodate Lacazette through the middle. Now, his stats at the moment, his goal ratio, is nowhere near as good as it was in the previous season. Well, I know that for a fact. He's in my dream team, and it's hurting me deeply every week. Whereas Wilfred Zaha now, there's been a role reversal. Zaha's now playing through the middle, where he can now drift to the left, drift to the right, and it's harder for defenders to pick him up. Zaha so far this season has got 5 in 6. So the moving of Wilf to the left hand predominantly through the season, Andros Townsend's downturn in form, allowed defenders to really, really focus and mark him out of games. What actually did develop was Wilf developed, he found other ways, clever ways to help the team. His turning in and passing became a lot better, but he wasn't as potent as he had been in previous seasons. Now, before we move on from that as we move on from that, you can't look at this in context without thinking about who Wilfred Zaha plays for. Now, obviously, he plays for Crystal Palace, and as a Palace fan, I have to admit, he plays in a team in the bottom half of the Premier League with a very defensive style. Now, I'm not going to go into the ins and outs of that style. Roy Hodgson is vindicated, I suppose. I read somewhere that we haven't been in relegation zone since near the end of 2017-2018 season. But the fact is that Wilfred Zaha is playing in an ultra-defensive team. Now, in that 2019-2020 season, when Wilfred Zaha would score 4 goals in 38 games, Palace actually only scored 31 Premier League goals. Now, that was actually one of the lowest totals in Europe, and also averaged 0.82 goals per game. So Wilfred's playing in that team. Now, these stats from this season so far are also very, very damning, but also highlight what Wilf is up against. We've had the least amount of average possession in the Premier League. We've had the fewest passes ending in the final third of the opposition half. Yet Wilf, at the beginning of the season, still managed 5 and 6 goals, which makes that even more impressive. So he's basically, these are the tools at his disposal. It's basically like Lewis Hamilton going into Formula One, driving a Skoda. So those people who look at Wilfred Zaha's stats in isolation, if they look at that 4 goals in 38 games, they're not looking at it in context. They're not really understanding the barriers that he faces. Now, managers who over obsess on stats, for me, I think of someone like Tony Pulis. It's a good manager that for Crystal Palace at one point, but has a ceiling. I think these fans who wrote Zaha off in the 1920 season for his 4 goals in 38 games, there's a ceiling to their football savviness. And all of a sudden, in this season, now he's got 5 and 6. Some of those fans are probably the ones going, "Oh, look at Wilfred Zaha, he's a great player. Why don't Palace let him go to Arsenal for cheap and so he can play for a bigger club?" I just want to finish on this because there's still some fans out there who, even with Wilf's good start, 5 and 6, even with the 10 goals he reached in the 18-19 season, there are still some fans out there who will compare him to someone like Raheem Sterling, which is absolutely ridiculous based on the fact of who Wilf plays for. To compare him to someone like Raheem Sterling is grossly unfair when Zaha plays for a team in the bottom half of the table, whereas someone like Sterling is playing for a team who won leagues and compete in the Champions League. I mean, it's like saying to Stormzy he still has to get a number 1 doing a duet with Peter Andre, although I would love to see Stormzy doing the Bubble of Ranks part actually on Mysterious Girl. That would be pretty awesome. But this is really, really interesting for me. Let's have a look and compare. There is one player playing for one of those big clubs in Mane who played for a similar stature club to Palace in Southampton. And let's compare his stats at Southampton to Zaha's stats at Palace. Now, Mane's most goals in a season for Southampton was 11 goals in the 15-16 season. 11 goals. Now, they actually finished 6th that season with a team that had Virgil van Dijk in it. Okay? So 11 goals for Mane. That's the most he got for Southampton, compared to Zaha's 10 in the 18-19 season. So Zaha's stats actually compare quite favourably against Mane's when they played for a similar stature club. Now, obviously, Mane has gone on to achieve fantastic things at Liverpool. And that sort of it has eluded Zaha in the last few years. And even though Zaha has got 5 and 6 so far this season, I'm not going to look at that stat in isolation and suddenly say Wilfred Zaha's this or that. For me, he's got to go on and prove himself again over 38 games. And it's going to be really interesting to see whether he can re-establish himself as one of the top players in the Premier League that I believe he and many of us, many fans and pundits believe he can be. So what I'm basically saying here is that those fans and pundits who in the 1920 season, when he got the 4 goals, wrote Wilfred Zaha off and looked at those stats in isolation, you're basically a Tony Pulis. You've overlooked at those stats without putting them into the broader picture of the game. And I do think it's interesting now. Have we really, as a country, really have we moved forward with our football philosophies as much as we think? When I think of Wilfred Zaha, for me, there's been an agenda against him pretty much from the outset of his career. He's quite a maverick in his style and his personality. And I just look at what Gareth Southgate's doing to Grealish, another player with quite a unique personality and playing style. Now, look at what Southgate's doing to Grealish at the moment. I just question whether we really have moved on as a country in terms of our footballing philosophy as we think we do. I think Wilfred Zaha's got it all to prove. He definitely has to get better stats this season, but to write him off based on the 18-19 season was very, very wrong, as some are already finding out based on Zahas 5 and 6. Will he be able to go on and get more? Can he beat the 10 that he got in the 18-19? He's already halfway there with 5. What do you think? What do you think about Wilfred Zaha as a player? Do you think people were right to write him off based on the 18-19 season? What do you think? Do you disagree with what I'm saying here? As always, comment in the comment section below. And if you like this video, please press the subscribe button. Another video on my channel about Wilfred Zaha, Man United flop, exposing the myth. Check it out and press that subscribe button.